almost like I'm just going to sit here till I can convince you to give me a chance. Because I know that this is my path.
Yes, I think at some point she turned around, she saw I was still there, and she was like, "Okay, you can start for this, right?" And I'm proud to say, in 3 months, I got a raise to 10,000 rupees a month, and got to work on MTV India, and Manipal, and I think Pantaloons, India's first mall. So that was pretty incredible. And in that time, I was also applying for design school, and then got accepted to Parsons. So
Persons.
yeah.
So, what I'm really hearing you say, Aisha, is that you knew through your experience, even though it was a short experience, of having your first card sale, like you made money. So that kind of gave you the confidence that this actually could work for you. And you enjoyed doing this, to your dad's point. And you just like literally said, this is a right opportunity for me. And I'm just going to stay here till I get this opportunity.
You find me outside your doorstep one day, just being like, just gonna park myself.
You have developed a self-awareness of who you are and where you want to go. But now what? Sound familiar? In my 20 years of practice as a superior court mediator, clinician, executive coach, and parent, I've noticed one thing above all. No meaningful transformation can happen unless you find and apply the tools and skills that are right for you. See, the thing is, without tools, without a recipe, you might as well flip a coin and hope it works. Or you'll get burnt out listening to bad advice and following tips that just aren't useful in your situation. I have been there, and I've seen thousands of clients right there as well. My name is Deepa, and Recipes for Life is my show where you and I learn the ingredients of high-performing, well-adjusted humans, how they get through their own life, all to craft a recipe for life of our own. Today's guest is Ayesha Mathews Wadhwa. Ayesha has an interesting story. She's a brand and creative leader with experience taking companies to $100 million plus in funding, successful IPOs, and more. She was raised in Bengaluru, India, and is a graduate of Parsons School of Design. She's led end-to-end creative projects with brands such as Apple, Facebook, Sephora, Amazon Lab 126, and the Smithsonian, with her creative agency Pixink, which was acquired in 2015. Ayesha loves orchestrating people, ideas, and products and experiences that feel transformative, have an innate beauty, and strengthen our sense of community and positive impact. By the end of today's conversation, you will have new ways to find community, access your flow state, and identify whether or not something drains or gains you of energy. You'll also hear Ayesha's fun take on how she would rebrand Costco's Kirkland brand and her core value of doing all with Pyar, to do with love. Aisha also talks about her immigrant journey and the value of finding community as a South Asian woman. Before we jump into the episode, I have one favor to ask of you. Promise me that you'll teach what you've learned from today's episode to someone you care about within 48 hours. Research shows that it'll help you internalize the tools beyond just listening to them. Here's lovely Aisha, Senior Director, Head of Global Brand Experience at Nium. Aisha, what is your favorite food that you like to cook, my friend?
Oh my God. Okay. If you said like to eat, it would have been a never ending list. So, like to cook was the right question. I have to say that at this stage of my life, like the criteria is it has to be really delicious, it has to be really simple and easy to put together. So, I tend to kind of gravitate towards one pot meals just because it's all in a pot. And I think our current favorite is pesto chicken pasta. And I think it's a favorite just because Vishal and Azai love it so much that I think the joy of cooking is really for the opportunity to share it with folks that you love. And because they're fans, it's now become my favorite dish to make.
Amazing. Do you follow an exact recipe? Do you change
Uh,
it? Like, what do you do?
I think I make sure that I have all the right ingredients. And that starts with some great pesto, obviously the actual ravioli, with chicken and cheese. And the rest of it kind of changes up. Sometimes I put in some onions and tomato, saute all of that really well. Pine nuts tend to add a really lovely sort of touch. But no, I don't follow like a super precise recipe, but I feel like the things that are always there tends to be the pine nuts, the pesto, tomato, and the pasta.
Do you make your pesto, or what brand of pesto do you use?
I use Kirkland's pesto. It's really good.
Is it? No way. I
Is
would
it?
not ever
Yeah.
imagine that you would say
Yeah.
Kirkland's.
Yeah. I know, and I wouldn't. I have a very interesting relationship with Costco, and needless to say, it was my husband that introduced me to it. And living in New York and Paris, and moving, to California, I think the first time I went to Costco in San Francisco, I was such a snob. I was such a like big city snob, and being like, "What is this suburban ass shit you're taking me to?" And I was horrified by the size and the scale of everything, right? I mean,
Right.
we were like two people. So outside of things like, the toilet paper and Bounty and whatever else you can use, there was just no way to consume any of this stuff, right? But now over
Right.
the years, I am a full convert. Uh,
Yeah.
my dream project would be to take the Kirkland brand and redesign it, because what I've really come to appreciate about Costco and the Kirkland brand is you get some really great quality. You get great value, you get great quality. They are kind of the world's biggest, I think, one of the biggest wine buyers, right? From what I'm know, and so you can get like really great value, which I appreciate, and some really good, stuff that comes in there. But my pet peeve has always been like, where's the design? Where's the branding? Like, there's such an opportunity here, because I think the ability to elevate something with beautiful design and brand just makes the whole experience, so much more fun. And to your point, you never thought the words like Kirkland pesto would come out of my mouth. We need to dive into that further and just be like, what do you associate with me? uh,
No, you just come across as somebody. Not that Kirkland is a bad brand. I mean, I go to Costco. Like when my son was young, Costco was like a thing. Right now, it's like you said, it's just two of us. It doesn't make sense. But I just always associate the brand with like big size, like, products which may go waste. And, that's what I associate Kirkland with more than the taste or anything. I'm like, oh my God, who's going to use this three big bottles of like whatever? So I get it. I get it makes sense for the consumer. But like you said, I think we should tag Kirkland on this podcast.
we really should. It took me a while to really warm up to them, but now
Yeah.
that I've crossed over and I'm a full
You're a
convert.
convert, like you said. I love it. I love it. So, so tell me something. Do you have like a routine or ritual that you do every day?
I mean, outside like the basics, brushing teeth, and you know,
Something, yes, outside of the basics.
basics around like personal
I'm
hygiene.
glad
And
you do the basics, Aisha.
um, I feel like it has to be morning chai, right? It's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
where it's like the first thing I drink, and I'm really fortunate. Vishal makes me my first cup of chai, which is a gift, and it is. I don't even know. I mean, yes, the caffeine helps, but I think it is more sort of muscle memory, and it's a ritual that has carried over, since I was a child. I mean, obviously, like I probably started drinking tea at home when I was a teenager, but that morning cup of tea for the family is something that I've always cherished, and I think it makes me feel connected to, just back home. I haven't, it's
Yeah,
been years
yeah.
since I moved from India, but I think it's a one ritual that makes me so feel connected. And even when I travel, I carry my little tea bag, and my morning chai is very rarely like the traditional Indian chai with, all of the spices. It's literally just the black tea with milk, sugar, and then I really love the elaichi added to it. So that's the extent of it. But I don't do the whole like ginger and the rest of it that your classic chai calls for.
Yeah, no, no, me neither, day to day. But when I go to my dad's house or when my dad is here visiting me, that's a traditional chai that we get. But many people think we add a bunch of spices, but we actually don't. Sometimes it's just
Yeah,
lychee or it's just ginger. And I'm
yeah.
like, no, no, we're not mixing all these things. We're just doing one thing, right?
Yes, exactly. And
And
I think for
yeah,
me, in my head, chai is very different from masala chai or
yep,
ginger chai.
exactly.
Like those are all, and you also can literally just do a lychee chai, but like there's just a straightforward, regular,
Love it.
everyday chai. Yes.
Love it.
Speaking of, where is your family home?
They're in Hyderabad.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
amazing. Is that
my
where you were
dad
born
is in.
and raised?
Yeah, my dad is in Hyderabad and my siblings are from Bangalore. Or wait, it is Bengaluru, as you know.
Bengaluru. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And so is that where you grew up?
yeah, yeah.
School and college. So when did you move to the US?
I came here 25 years ago,
Oh my God, that's
1998.
amazing. Yeah, so we're kind of the same
Crazy.
vintage. Yeah, I moved
Exactly.
2000.
Yeah, yeah, almost the same.
Yeah.
I want to quickly circle back to when you talked about, design and brand marketing. That's the big 40 of the work that you do. I'm curious, what would be your first design change for Kirkland? If you had.
Yeah. Gosh. The way I think about it is what is the kind of design, especially since it's lifestyle, you want to have something that you feel really good about putting on your table, right? It's a brand you want to show off. What does that mean? I mean, there's so many beautifully designed brands. And I think when you think of like Moss and brands at scale, Target did this really well. At some point when Target was kind of going through a really big rebrand, they were really, I think, savvy about figuring out how to create value, right? And really create very um, water friendly or, price friendly products, but to package it in a way that made it feel that it was more upscale than what it is. And they did really great design collaborations, and they still do, right? Across the board, they're kind of curate really best in class sort of designers and kind of create capsule collections for Target. But even a lot of their main sort of brand, I feel like Target, made this very concerted shift to kind of be known and to put design and brand at the core and at their center in a way that Costco Kirkland hasn't. And I think by all intents and purposes, like maybe they don't feel like they need to, right? It hasn't impacted the value of their business. It's a really, really strong brand in business. And I think it's a great sort of description of can you sort of be a brand leader if you don't put design at your core and center? And the answer is yes. But what happens to a brand if you do put design at the core and center and just think of the Apples, think of the Targets, think of all of the, the Airbnbs, right? All the brands that we've come to love that really have design at the center and core to their offering and how they show up in the world. And so just by default, I tend to be super biased, right, towards those brands. And so I think about, again, like, you can always cook a delicious meal and serve it in a pressure cooker on the table, right? And, and that's fine. But if you care about aesthetic, your your classic Indian pressure cooker is not like super pretty, right? And then a brand like Our Place comes in where they kind of make these beautiful stove or oven to table, kind of dishes and have things that you can literally cook in, serve, and store in the fridge. And then all of a sudden, that's form and function, adding in all of those layers to make it more accessible. So back to Kirkland, I just think that everything from elevating sort of the font, the colors, and still keep what's core to their DNA, sort of honor that. But how do we infuse a design language that feels like an aesthetic that's more pleasing? And that's my opinion.
Of course. And I think to your point, the real question here is when we talk about Kirkland, do they really care? Because they don't have a business imperative right now because it's selling well, it's doing really well, right? And does it really matter? And if it matters, what is the reason that they'd want to do it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's really, for brand and for design to be a business imperative. I think it kind of goes back to the DNA. If you think of like Steve Jobs and his DNA, and he's somebody who spent time actually learning calligraphy, right? And that learning helped inform, and his awareness around the choice of fonts or typography when it came to Apple. So I do think that if it does stem from like the core team, the core DNA of the brand. And it's almost always better if it is that way because then it's true to the brand. I feel like when design is sort of added in as a superficial layer or the idea of like a design led brand comes in as a superficial layer, it most times fails just because if the core leadership team, if the company isn't signed off on it across different levels, it has to become sort of a practice, not,
Not something that's layered on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it has to be part of their core value for it to really make sense and for it to work. Now, the question to you is what about can stronger sort of brands attract better talent?
Can stronger brands attract better talent? Yeah, I mean, I think so, right? I feel like it depends again. Like I'm somebody, you talked about a mentor you spoke with and how at the age of 20, 25, 23, she made a bet on you based on potential versus, skill or competency. And I think just the way I'm wired and what I find attractive and where I find like I can make the most impact and do my best work is when I see the potential of a brand, right? Because that's sort of me personally super satisfying to be able to see that trajectory from here or there. And I think um, for every person, like what attracts them to a brand or company is going to be different. I think for me, being in the business of branding, it's a very different sort of like filter that I'm looking at. But absolutely, when you think of talent brand and employer brands, a reason that's come to the forefront in the past few years, and the reason companies invest in that is because it's a magnet for talent, right? Anybody coming out of school or looking to switch jobs, you're going to gravitate towards the brands that are well known, well recognized, and have sort of that, leadership in the market as compared to ones that don't.
Yeah, that that definitely makes sense. Um, you know, I just quickly want to say, circling back to Target, back in the day, and I still do, when all of his friends started shopping, we used to call it Target just for the reason that you just mentioned. We're like, yes, we got this from Target. I mean, it just speaks to how amazing they do their branding and how, you know, they're so impactful about it, right?
I think they do it brilliantly. And I remember kind of being a fairly young designer, maybe just a couple of years out of school, and going to a talk where, listening to one of the founders of the agencies that have helped, was part of like all of this redesign for brands, for the Target brand, speak and talk about it. And it just was so inspiring for me to kind of see, a mass market brand take an Italian company like Alessi. Alessi makes beautiful, products, right? And really high-end products, but make it accessible and figure out a way to, bring sort of high design to sort of a mass market. And I'm a huge proponent and believer of that, right? Because when there's great design, most times it's intentional, it's thought through, and you're getting a better experience and as a result, a better product. And why shouldn't everyone have access to that.
Yeah. So in that talk, really quick, Aisha, was there a specific principle or like something the person that said that really stayed with you? That like really the idea, the big framework, I understand, but was there something specific that you heard that stayed with you?
Yeah. I think this would be my first boss at this incredible design studio named eSign, which is now called Spread in India. It's huge. Sonia Manchanda is like a legend, and I was so fortunate to be able to work with her before I sort of that transition period, graduating from college while trying to figure out my place in design. It was kind of this exploration because I was the only one in the studio at that time that didn't have a formal design or art training and background. I came in with a degree in commerce, and it was very nerve wracking. And when I think about the portfolio that I took for my, it wasn't an interview. A friend of a mutual friend connected me. I kind of went there. Like I would like cringe today thinking about what I considered was my portfolio. The only thing I had going for me was like my absolute conviction that this was a place that I needed to be. And I sat there till she hired me, Deepa. I didn't leave. Like I just sort of sat there. I met with her. She looked at it. She didn't laugh in my face. Bless her heart, right? But she also knew she couldn't like legitimately give me a job, right? But I just didn't leave. I kind of just sat there. And then I think she finally was like, okay, you can start. And, this is going to be like 3,000 rupees a month was my starting salary. And it was like diving in to the deep end, right? I remember having to teach myself Adobe Illustrator, like all of a sudden, like I'm working on a logo for Manipal University in India, which is, a huge university, and submitting designs. But I think when you sort of know, you're the only one without sort of the formalized training and the skill set and the like, just how far you need to leap to catch up. And, there were very, very talented colleagues at that studio. But the biggest lesson Sonia taught me was Pyar se. Okay. She said, if you're going to do anything, do it with love. And I think that has had to be one of the most profound and important lessons that doesn't just work for design. It works for leadership. It works for life. It's part of my recipe for life, right? And going back to the title of your show, which I love. So I think that has really stuck. And I feel like even today, I use it as a filter and a blueprint. If I take something on and I'm unable to do it with love, then the question is, should I be doing it or should I be giving it to somebody else who can do it with love? And that's what I ask of my team. And I ask, because things can get very transactional. Sometimes, things are moving fast. People are busy. You can kind of go in and be like, check it off the list and I'm here, you're paying me and you're going to get X for what you're giving me. But I found that I think, and maybe it's because, I identify as a creative and how I kind of am wired and function. But that has never been my MO. I've never been, excited by sort of doing something that checks off, the books. It's always been like, how do you do it with love if you're going to do it? Right? Yeah.
Oh my God, Aisha, thank you for sharing that, because now it's like that puzzle piece that clicked for me when you said that, because since the time I've interacted with you, you've done this at every interaction, Pyar se. It's unbelievable to me that I'm now seeing that you've embodied this at every single interaction we've had together. And not only with me, with everybody else. When we did the South Asian Women's Leadership event, that's just, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. This is who she is. So wow, thank you really for sharing that, because now it all makes sense to me. How does she do this? And now I know this is a practice for you. This is a value for you.
It is a value, but it's also it's mirroring the energy you bring, Deepa. And frankly, with any, I mean, this is what I've learned, and sometimes a hard way, that no matter how you think about something, your level of excitement, your level of investment, all you own or control is 50% of that equation, right? Because and every time, that goes out of balance, where if my investment in you, or what I wanted to give or offer, was at 80% and yours was 20%, that might be okay for a little while, but sooner or later that creates a misalignment, right? In expectations, the quality of the relationship. And so I think that the thing about PR say is it has to also be met, and it has to be mirrored. And so I just want to tell you that if you felt it, it's because you came with the same energy.
Thank you for that. And I have a feeling, and you do this in your leadership role too, which I want to explore in a quick second. But before that, I want to circle back to something that you said earlier when you were sitting in front of Sonia and you were this you had zero experience, and you said you just sat there. What do you mean? You just sat there, and what was your thinking process? What were you thinking? Like, you dug your heels in and you're like, I'm just going to stay here? Talk to me about that. I was like, wait, this is amazing.
I feel like to get to that point, I need to give you a little bit of context of, what life between 13 and maybe 19 was like. And, no surprise, like, we are a middle-class family in Bangalore. As a teenager, the opportunities to get into trouble were literally none. Since you kind of grew up in a similar similar
Yes.
time. And so it was school, right? And obviously being a great student, doing well, no brainer, right? Just check off all of those things, because that was the baseline. Like, you couldn't even think about anything else or ask for anything if you didn't do your primary job, which was go to school and study.
Right. Right.
And
Absolutely.
so I feel like there was a lot of that, and I embraced it. I was a kind of kid where I loved to read, and so I knew that if I got my homework done, then I would have all this time to read. And I think the majority of my childhood was very, very books driven, and even as a teenager, like, I spent a lot of my time like at my dad's bookshelf. Okay, so as a 15-year-old, I'm reading Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm reading, the book From Pepsi to Apple, which I'm now blanking out on the author, but that's when I discovered the character of Steve Jobs, right? The book was not about him. It was John Scully's book and his story of going from Pepsi to Apple. And I ended up falling in love with this character in the book named Steve Jobs that I didn't know about. This was like, early 90s in India. Like, Apple still hadn't infiltrated. We didn't have a computer at home. We had to go into the library and, get access to the computer. Like, yeah, exactly. Like, reserve one, kind of use it, like, listen to the dial-up sound, and then leave for the next person to do that. So it just, like, Apple was not a brand that, anyone knew at that time. And, my interest in art and creative, like, I used to sketch and draw, spend summers going to like art classes, but you know how it is. That's the hobby. That's not the career, right? At least at that stage, in India. And so I think coming out of graduating college, I knew I had several competencies, but I also grew up with a dad who said, there's nothing like doing something you love and being paid for it. And that kind of stuck, right? And I was like, well, I could do A, B, and C, and I can apply myself and do it well. But I'm really curious and excited about the space called design. It was still very nascent. Advertising was pretty well known, but it was not what I was drawn to. And so I felt like I had like a fledgling business. I would hand make sort of invitations and cards and kind of sell to like a small mom and pop boutique. And then I actually ended up, that was like my first entrepreneurial venture. And I remember signing on my first client at some point in the late 90s. And he gave me a 50% deposit check for 15,000 rupees. At that point, that was a big deal. The job itself was 30,000 rupees, right? But in like 97, 98 for like a, 17, 18-year-old, that was a pretty big deal. And I remember it was only when I brought that check home that my parents were like, okay, let's pay attention. And like, clearly you're super interested in this, and clearly someone out there is paying you for it. So let's figure out how you can actually, pursue design. And so without, at that point, there was an art school in Bangalore called Chitrakaala Parishad, that was CKP for short, that I'd kind of missed because you start out to standard 10. And then there was the Indian Institute of Design in Ahmedabad that was also really famous, but they also needed me to do a full bachelor's, kind of start like up to 12. And so I was unwilling to kind of spend another 5 years kind of redoing stuff. And so looking at colleges abroad was the only option. And when I met Sonia through, I said, a colleague, I was president of college, and we do a big cultural festival called Kala. And I'd hired this team of artists from Chitrakaala Parishad to help like build out our, kind of the event decor. And they did amazing. That's how I knew Vinil. Vinil said like, hey, I work at this thing. And, since you're interested and you kind of, make these invitations and stuff, maybe you should come meet Sonia and see, see if there's any opportunities there. So I think just with everything that I'd seen and learned, I was pretty convinced that this was the path I wanted. It was unclear where, the future would lead. But to your point, I think she met with me and I kind of just sat there. I wouldn't leave. And it wasn't weird. I didn't feel weirded out because I felt like, okay, there was a friend of mine who was working here that I knew. It didn't come from any place of entitlement, but it also just came from like, look, I have to do this. I don't know where to start. This seems like a start. So
you were almost like, I'm just going to sit here till I can convince you to give me a chance because I know that this is my path.
Yes, I think at some point she turned around, she saw I was still there, and she was like, okay, you can start for this, right? And I'm proud to say in 3 months, I got a raise to 10,000 rupees a month and got to work on MTV India and Manipal, and I think Pantaloons, India's first mall. So that was pretty incredible. And in that time, I was also applying for design school and then got accepted to Parsons. Yeah.
So, what I'm really hearing you say, Aisha, is that you knew through your experience, even though it was a short experience, of having your first card sale, like you made money. So that kind of gave you the confidence that this actually could work for you. And you enjoy doing this, to your dad's point. And you just like literally said, this is a right opportunity for me. And I'm just going to stay here till I get this opportunity.
You find me outside your doorstep one day, just being like, just gonna park myself till I get what I want.
But no, it's also very like endearing, and it speaks to your grit and determination, I think, to really follow your instinct and not be scared of trying something because you knew in your heart at some level that this is the thing that's going to bring you joy. That's what I'm getting.
Exactly. And I think the other big realization at that point, because it wasn't sort of a slam dunk, I want to do design. And it's like, sure, how much money do you need? Where do you want to go? Type of thing, right? It was a process of persuading my parents first, right, to really sort of support this. And then, finally my dad sort of said that, well, if you really want to do this, then go get yourself trained and get yourself a proper formal education, because I don't want you to just try to work your way through it. Who knows, right? I mean, at least I'm not sure which path, would have worked out. But for me, I think looking back, this was the perfect path for me because here I am, having a conversation with you all these years later. But I think that was in my head, which is how I started to apply to design schools. But I think going back, you know, the thing about John Scully's book and kind of reading about this character named Steve Jobs was I realized to pursue anything that's a passion, you need to be relentless in that pursuit, right? Because there is going to be a lot of pain, sacrifice, suffering. So that was really internalized. It was very clear. And the other thing was a real belief that if you have a talent, right, even if it's, you know, however, like sort of small or big, I think it's your responsibility to invest in that and build on that. Um, and that there's a difference between like your core strengths, your superpowers, and like your competencies and skills, right? That you can build and be like, yeah, I kind of suck at it, but I can apply myself and kind of get better. And I think I've always just gravitated to like, what is the stuff that's going to light me up, right? That where I can get into a state of flow. And design till today, if I'm like just muddling about and puddling about, I have peers and team members who are far more talented and skilled than I am, but it's still a space. It's one of the few spaces that I get into a state of flow where I'm lost hours later. Like you have to come like, tap me and be like, what are you doing? And
The fact that you, from a very young age, continue to listen to the thing that feels right for you in your head. I mean, people say broadly we can say it's gut instinct, listen to it. But what I'm like really hearing you say is that you really were like very thoughtfully, you were like listening and paying attention to what matters to you and then relentlessly pursuing it.
yeah, and I'd actually say I would argue that that was much stronger when I was younger, right? Because let's face it, with experience and time, um, you do become risk averse, and sometimes it's a good thing. You become, you just get more calibrated, I guess, in your thinking versus just going all out. But there are times in your life where you just have to go all out, right? So I feel like very grateful that at that time, there was just sort of the conviction of my belief and my passion that drove me without really understanding all the repercussions and what it means and what the consequences could be and all of the risk that, comes with it.
Coming back to a couple of things that you said, you came to this country after that experience in India, you came to Parsons, and then how did you, like, can you speak to maybe a challenge that you went through or like at that point a struggle because you were new to this country, you were here by yourself, you were here with $2,000 and you had to figure out a way to make it happen and with $100,000 loan, as you mentioned. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So I think, there was all the classic sort of challenges, right? And I feel, you're an immigrant, I'm an immigrant. We all know immigrants who came 10 years ahead of us, 20 years ahead of us, and they came with $20, right? And so I think I've always been like um, sensitive about talking about like challenges or hardships because my story is not unique. Like every immigrant has had their share of struggles and journeys, and you know. But I think for me, the biggest thing was I want to say that my foundational upbringing, you really appreciate like who you are and what you've been taught when you leave home is what I felt. Because otherwise, I was very sheltered. You know, like I remember, I don't think I ever took public transport. I never took a bus anywhere. And there was a time when I think, my dad and I, we were having like an argument and he refused to like drop me to work on his way to work. And Deepa, I was so scared of taking a bus, I walked 2 hours to work because I'd never been on a public bus in Bangalore. Okay. So I'd never written a check in my life. So to kind of come from that level of, and yet, right, I was an entrepreneur, I was college president, I was, figuring out ways to make money. So I think it was a really interesting mixed bag. But I felt like I had everything that I needed. Like I had the ingredients. I just needed to smarten up on application and kind of get ready. Like, here's the real world. And that's kind of a test and learn environment. And I think by and large, I feel really like blessed because, for the most part, people were hopeful, situations kind of worked out. I think I'll never forget my first lesson in credit was, again, growing up in India, credit was a bad word. Like, you didn't buy anything if you didn't have the money. Simple, right? You wanted a television, you had cash, you went and bought it, whatever it was. And so I came in here to the US with no concept of what building credit means. And I remember when I had to get my first Mac, and, I didn't have the luxury of internship, so I freelanced and sort of made some money on the side, but I still needed, credit to cover a part of it. I paid 26% interest. Okay. And I just remember being like flabbergasted, just being like, no, I don't have credit because I don't buy shit if I don't have the money, right? Like that was what I was taught. And here I am being penalized in the worst possible way for not having credit, right? So I just think it's stuff like that where if you have no precedent and, just not like savvy enough to like find out and, do your research and ask around. Those were some of the harder lessons for me that I was just like, oh my God, like, this is painful.
Yeah. And no, and that's so true. I'm sure a lot of immigrants, even now, maybe not now, but this was 20 years ago, it was very different, would completely relate to that. But what I'm hearing you say is that you had strong values that were instilled in you. You kind of knew where you wanted to go, but it's just like sometimes you gotta have the experience in order to like really understand. Like these are the life lessons that you just have to go through and figure a way around it and learn from it.
Yeah. I think
Right?
it's just that street smartness, like we call it, right? Like that's the other way of saying, like, how do you navigate the world? Because you can be incredibly good, incredibly brilliant and talented with a lot of things, but kind of navigating the real world is a whole different sort of skill set, and that needs hustle mentality. And I feel like that's the gift that this whole adventure has given me. And, doing it on my own, moving to New York, moving to Paris, moving back, right? Like you can't get anywhere by kind of waiting politely for your turn. Like yes, you are. Like it's not about being obnoxious, right? But it really is about figuring out ways how to advocate for yourself, especially, I was in a space where it wasn't common at that time to be brown and in design, right? It's like, now I'm thrilled, like, to see how many young girls, especially through Wild Women in Leadership and Design, which is part of the AIGA, it gives me so much joy to just see, groups after groups of like young Indian women and men, right, and boys and girls sort of graduate with degrees in design.
Absolutely. And I completely resonate with that. And we have such, parallelly, we have our stories, like there's so much like similarities. Like when I first started doing my master's in, I know, like, it's just when I started doing my master's in marriage and family therapy, there was nobody that looked like me. None of my Indian friends at that time, 25 years ago, were like, you're going into psychology? Like, why not engineering? But now there's so many. It's just so heartwarming to see like young Southeast Asian kids get into other fields.
So Deepa, how did you know that was the space for you?
Oh my God, I literally have a very funny story which will I share very quickly because I do have a couple of questions I would ask you. I was always interested in how people think and behave since when I was a very young girl. And, I told my mother when I was in my, wanted to do my degree, I said, I'm interested in psychology. She was like, no way, no thank you. You're not going to be seeing quote unquote, I really even cringe saying this, but this was her. Like, this is almost 30 years ago. Said, you'll become mental like the mental people. I was like, oh my God, but she didn't know any better. I didn't know any better. I said, Ma, that's not the case. But then she said, no, don't do it. So I ended up doing civics and economics like any good kid, good Indian daughter, right? I came to this country, I got married, and I told my husband, I was like, hey, I want to do psychology. And he's like, great, go for it. I'm like, awesome. So I went and researched and did it. I called my mother very excited, and I'm like, I'm going to show her. I said, Ma, I'm going to do psychology. And you know what she said, Aisha? She said, good, great. I was like, what do you mean, good, great? Aren't you worried now? She said, I'm not worried now. You're your husband's responsibility.
I love it.
She was like, I'm not worried at
No
all.
longer you're my liability. Yes.
I was like, what? Anyway, but fast forward, it's something you said, right? It's instinctively, I just knew that was the thing that really I was going to enjoy. And I had a supportive husband who was like, just go for it. Don't worry about anybody else and just do it. And when I went in and I did my first class, I knew I was going to have so much fun with this, even though it was going to be hard, right? Just listening to myself. And, you and I met, and this is a great segue. You and I met because I reached out to you and wanted to chat with you, and you were giving this time and space for people to connect with you from wherever around just leadership or just advice and mentorship. And one of your big tenets, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you really love supporting and encouraging South Asian women in leadership.
I think it goes, yes. I know we met through NATRI, which is an incredible organization, but I think my passion, it's really been women, right? In general. And I think, when I was for about 6 years, I founded a creative agency called PixInc and, grew that over a 6-year period. And I remember, and it was focused on sort of brand and design. And I remember coming across a bunch of research that talked about the size of the female economy. Okay, it was like at that point, a $20 trillion, is still $1 trillion sort of market and economy. But I think I was so taken aback with all of this supposed economic, access. By and large, women were still working in a world, sort of living in a world that wasn't designed by them for them. And if you, I was just looking up some stats from the World Economic Forum. When it comes to parity for economic opportunities and sort of the financial, leveling, it's going to take 169 years for parity. Right? From today, at the rate at which we've been going, as of 2023, it's going to be another 169 years. And I think, the contrast of that, sort of like, yes, we have this supposed purchasing power, but how much of that is translating to real power, right? Where we're sitting around tables that were designed for us. When you think about it, sort of corporate America and the world, a lot of the world, isn't truly sort of designed with sort of feminine principles, right? It's all very sort of masculine driven in sort of the structure, the format. And at best, for a long time, our best bet was to sort of, twist and turn and find ways to fit into this world. And then I think I was sort of profoundly kind of struck with, what if we could really use that economic power or this purchasing power that we have to start to shift and shift the way, things were designed. So it was going to be more equitable for women because I think just having the purchasing power without the investing power, without the actual access to capital, like none of that really matters if all that power is only when it comes to the time when we can shop, right? And when if just with that, like most things that when they're marketed to women, and this is something that's changing now, thank God, but by and large, hangover from like the 50s marketing, panders to women, right? It's like, oh, let's make pink, razors and market it to women. Let's make something else sort of pink and market it to women. And it's not only sort of a dumbing down, but there was never real true functionality looked at, or how is this truly going to benefit a woman? Is it really designed, for her to solve her problems? And I'm really thrilled to kind of, see that there's so much change even in the last, 10 years. But to your point, Deepa, I think my interest in kind of supporting women and making sure that if I could do in my little way everything I could in my power to sort of empower and selfishly was also be empowered, right? Because this idea of belonging, it's not just about being South Asian and needing to feel included or feel a sense of belonging. It's really, I think, you feel like you belong. And this goes beyond sort of even, the color of your skin or your ethnicity. It's really being honored for the way you naturally are wired and how you think and what you bring to the table, right? That is sort of where there's true belonging. And I think for too long, the script has been, in order to succeed, you need to be this, this, this. And most times those qualities, those skills, whatever, are driven around what makes men successful. And that's great. That's the formula for them. But to sort of, try to sort of say, hey, for you to succeed as a woman in corporate America, you need to take on male characteristics and male tendencies, which has been sort of the messaging for a while. Just sort of felt like, why is that okay? And who wants to work in those circumstances, right? It's not authentic, it's not real. But in how do we sort of carve out what it is to lead like a woman, to lead with sort of our incredible feminine superpowers? It's now been proven out that, all of the soft skills are indeed what's going to make, our current workplaces and future workplaces, more innovative, more equitable. And I think sort of that work of really honoring that, codifying that, and making that sort of the OS, the operating system, for the world that we live in, whether it's corporate, business, social, political, is something that I feel passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell. But Aisha, here's the thing, right? I mean, this is a long journey. It's not something that's just going to happen right away. So how do we talk to women, or how do we develop women, whether it's mentoring, advising, coaching, or consulting, in making this sort of shift or transition in how we think and believe about certain ways of being a leader?
So I think the other stat that I didn't share yet is when it comes to education attainment, we're 16 years away from parity. Okay. And I think that's the first step. And I was really delighted to hear that because, like with anything, right? On some level, knowledge is power. I mean, just from ourselves, know yourself, right? Before you do anything else, get a good sense of who you are, what makes you tick, what your strengths are, weaknesses, etc. And I think in a similar way for, women to fully step into their power, just as an individual and as a collective, it's about understanding that the script was not written for them. So it's okay to write their script according to their terms and to rewrite it, but you still have to negotiate and navigate a lot of the infrastructure that was built, for a certain, a male-dominated infrastructure. And I think that, access to sort of information, education, that's the first step. And then the next one is sort of just access to financial literacy, access to capital, right? These are all of the things, all of the different levers that I think we're seeing, many, many amazing people push on. I'm part of some of those initiatives. But it's really, I think, those are all the places that we should be focusing on. But I feel like the message at the end of the day, start with yourself. how is Deepa showing up in the world? How is Aisha showing up in the world? Right? Because you're right. When you think about change on any scale, it's overwhelming, and it's very um it can almost be paralyzing to think of, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to contribute, to this gigantic problem that's going to take 169 years, to fix at our current rate, right? Well, maybe that's not my entire problem to solve, but can I at least, like, with the ways that I have access to, and whatever, whatever ways I can have impact, am I able to move the needle and further the cause? And that's I think that's the ask, and that's first a recognition of who you are and what you have to offer. That there's value in that, in you showing up as yourself and just being. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me add another layer to that, right? So we know a lot of women who are there right now, who have the education, who have the financial literacy, who are at a point or stage in their life where they're like, oh my God, I want a seat at the table, but I don't know how to get there. Like, I don't see myself there because there's not a lot of people that look like me that are there. And so what is the message? What is the like a recipe for these women to sort of get there? Forget about the big picture and the numbers and everything, just individually.
So, Deepa, I feel like today, right? Like, sort of saying there aren't that many people who look like me, and I don't want to minimize that, but even in the past 10 years, okay, the number of people who look like me and you in senior levels of leadership, right, are far more than it's ever been. So I think the first thing is kind of, let's not feed ourselves or give ourselves the script that it doesn't exist, right? Just look around, like, really, like, just get on the web, right? Like, I feel like, and maybe it's part of, like, being in Silicon Valley, being out here, but I don't think there's any dearth of um, you know, women in leadership, whether it's women of color or, just the various styles of leadership. Yes, it's still not on the same levels as, male leadership, but there's more now than ever before. And I think the ability to I feel like there's tons and tons of groups and communities that are coming together to elevate, the cause of women, whether professionally, socially, politically, and finding these groups, plugging into them, finding out how you fit in, where you add value, how you sort of learn from, the cohort that you're with. I think those are some of the ways, and I these are like the accessible ways. Like, if I had to go do this tomorrow, like, this is what I would do for myself, right? Just be like, look around, where's the next meetup? If it's, something for women in design, there's 10 organizations that I can easily find that I'm able to plug into. So I don't think it's at least maybe being, and maybe I'm just like, the privilege of living in the Bay Area. I might be like just spoiled by access and seeing what's around me. But I feel there's so many communities that are online, remote, right? Just like allowing for this kind of collective coming together and offering support, that just plugging in there is an amazing, amazing gift. Like, if you have an ability, just today I got off a call with an incredible mentor that I met through the Hugh Next, Leadership Accelerator program. Her name is Jean Bethany. And she was talking about how she's built a personal board of directors, right? And I was like, that sounds amazing. And I obviously immediately wanted her to be on mine. And I think the idea of, even if there isn't formal groups or any kind of formal, infrastructure to plug into as a woman leader looking to elevate and further the journey, just getting together a group of people you admire, men and women, right, that you feel like you want to learn from, whether it's leadership, whether it's how they've navigated their career, whether it's how they raise their children, like whatever it is that you're like, wow, I really admire that about you and how you navigated that. And I would love to learn. And do you have 15 minutes, you know, and kind of taking that time. And I feel like that is that investment in yourself, right? Going back to that thing, you don't believe that what you have to offer has value, right? In this world, just who you are is valuable and needed in this world. I feel like so much of that conversation needs to start from within before you can go out and, build your support groups or your personal board of directors.
What you're saying goes to your earlier point is that really it starts with just self-awareness and a conversation, self-introspection about what is it that I want for myself. And then when you look at actual barriers, or when you look around you, you're saying, listen, the numbers are where the numbers are at, right? Because the workplace report of 2023 still shows the numbers pretty bleak, which we all know, right? But you're saying, but look at your environment around you, and instead of focusing on, hey, the barriers and everything, which is true, which are there, but focus on creating your own support system. And there's more and enough ample opportunity to do that. And start building your network, start talking to people, start connecting to people, reaching out to like-minded people, find mentors. So you're saying that that's pretty much would be the next step for somebody to do that.
I think, it's just my bias. I'm a glass half full, bias where I really think it is incredibly hard to live with optimism and live with a sense of hope and energy if you don't look for that and reinforce that in your life, right? There's too much. I mean, there is no reason I should be waking up tomorrow morning. Okay, if I just look at the news, look at the world, look at the shit that's happening, there is no reason for me to wake up. Like that's for me, like I'm high empathy, so it's really easy for me to internalize. And I think you and I have talked about this in another conversation just about boundary setting and how important it is to protect your peace, right? Whatever that looks like. And at the same time, I know the more that I focus on that, it goes into my net drain column versus my net gain column, right? And going back to sort of like, living with intention, knowing yourself. I mean, Socrates, right? It's like the oldest philosopher, at least that I know, said, know thyself, right? And that's a lesson which is thousands of years old, and I still think is super relevant and true for every one of us today. And I think what that just helps with is that only by some sense of awareness of who you are can you live with intention and understand that maybe this is a path that's better suited for you versus another path, right? And I think when you live with intention, like what you're doing is manifesting. Right. I don't think I knew those terms or was aware of any of that, when I was a teenager and essentially manifesting my, life and career without understanding that was what it was doing. It was just having an intention, having a vision, and kind of being like, okay, what is the next best step that I can access? And that's all I know. And then the next best step appears right after that. And I think, I do think, at least knowing this is what you want to do and putting it out there and being, having that clarity is super important.
Yeah. Aisha, are there like any tools in your own life and in the amount of mentoring that, and coaching that you yourself have done? Are there any tools or anything specific that you can recommend for people who, want to learn more about themselves at a certain age or stage they're in, and they're like, listen, I want to sort of explore this? Or is there anything that you have tried or worked that would help?
I'm very, very partial to StrengthsFinder, Gallup StrengthsFinder. I'm sure you work with it in your work, but and there's many things, right? There's Myers-Briggs, there's many ways of, there's Enneagrams. And I think personally, I tend to be biased with strengths because I love the idea of working with your strengths, leaning to your strengths. Of course, we have weaknesses, right? But not only as an individual, but as a team, when we all kind of lean in and are aware of our strengths, then even with teams, you understand where the complementary strengths need to come in to kind of fill in one of my weaknesses or a bunch of my weaknesses, right? And so I think coming in with, with at least that understanding is super special. And the part that, this is the little data point that I love about the Strengths Finder work. And I used to hate that question. Remember, like at classic interview question, like, what are your strengths? And I was like, oh, like the worst thing. Until I found the language to articulate it. And then I was like, oh my God, similar to like, Aisha, you said this and everything clicked into place for me. And I had that similar moment when I saw my top 5 strengths. I was just like, oh my God, now I know. Now I can articulate and give language to some of the things that I felt and sensed, but didn't quite know how to codify, and put it into words. And so that was incredibly empowering. And then the other incredible piece that I love about strengths is there is only a 1 in 33 million chance that your top 5 strengths is going to match with the next person with the same exact top 5 strengths in that order, right? So going back to we're all snowflakes and, we all have something unique to the table. I love that the fact, like with this, there's actual data that shows that if A, B, C, D, and E are Deepa's top 5 strengths in that order, you'll need to talk to 33 million people before you come across the next one that has exactly, right? So, I mean, just there, like, you're like, oh, how am I unique? What makes me different in the world? I'm like, well, start with that, right? Anyone can access it. It's $16, I think.
Yeah. All right. I love that. And you're saying that this has been your experience, and you would definitely, through your own experience, recommend people to start this or at least explore this option and see what it brings them. Incredible.
Yes.
As we are wrapping up, one final question for you, Aisha. With everything that's going on in your life right now, your work and your baby and your partner, family and friends, what is your recipe for life today, now?
Let's see. I think the 2 that come to mind right away is living with intention, have like some sense of what you want to create, and living with gratitude. I am just, super grateful when I think of my current life, my path, just every single, I really feel like it is, again, the net gain. It fuels energy when I kind of have gratitude. And so I think living with intention, living with gratitude is super important for me as my recipe. And I think the third thing, again, for me that I realized over time is it's really important for me to feel a sense of connectedness to either the people, the person, the organization. And, I'm having this conversation and spending time with you because I feel a sense of connectedness. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to be my full self with you and have this much fun. Like, I know we've spent over an hour and a half and the time has just flown for me. And so, I think I seek that out. It's something I know I need, to feel before I can invest, whether it's time, energy. So that would be, I think, my third thing.
I love that. And the cherry on the top is Pyar se.
Yes.
Aisha, thank you so much. Thank you for the time and energy and space. I really appreciate you, and I had so much fun.
I really appreciate you. Thank you for hosting this amazing show and giving not just me, but all of your guests this kind of space to show up in the world.
Hey, this is Deepa again. I hope you really enjoyed my show today. Thank you so much for listening to our conversation. If you'd love to get in touch with me or my guest, or would like the show notes, resources, or links, please reach out to me on my website. I would also love your feedback. Until next time.